A while back, a coworker was asking about whether anybody wanted to get into drag racing, and I've had a fascination with figuring out how to tune engines, so I said yeah, and together we decided on buying this car. It's a 96 Cobra that's been built up to be a purpose-built race car. And we ran it briefly last year and decided to take some time to actually work through any issues that we uncovered. We were not getting the power we expected or anything else, so I've been hacking away at it for quite a while now, a couple months at least. And I just finished some of the major work, and I thought I'd give a little tour of what we've got. So in the engine bay, I'm not going to go over much. Pretty much left everything the way it was from the original installation. The main difference is that there's some new power routing that you can kind of see down here. You can see these two, these are actually single 0 gauge wires running back up to the front of the engine compartment from the firewall. And why are there two red? Well, the ground is actually completely on the other side of the engine bay, which we can't see, so we'll skip that. The two reds, one, this car, even though it is a drag race car, actually has an alternator, as you can see right here. In fact, the previous owner lived in Pennsylvania, and this car was actually street legal there, amazingly enough. Not so much in California. So here, the yellow marked cable is the alternator return path. It's basically the output of the alternator. And I keep that separate because all the way in the back we have the fuel cell and a power cutoff. So in the case when you have an alternator, you actually have two separate feeds. You have the feed from the battery, which runs up into this newly installed aluminum battery box. And you also have the alternator feed, and both of those need to go through a disconnect. So that way, if there's an emergency on the racetrack and we need to kill the power to the vehicle, push this switch in. And now all the power has been disabled. The battery is still here and there's still power on that line. If the alternator were running, it would still be coming in here, but it doesn't actually pass back through the additional wiring, which we can't really see too well in here. But inside there, we've got two studs that run the power back up and through the front. So here we have some service loops on the cabling, running up and back in through the front. Now, working from the back of the car back up to the front, you've got the fuel cell, which also means fuel pumps are back here. This car is equipped with nitrous, so it actually has a cheater system, so it runs with a separate fuel rail for filling into the nitrous system as from the main fuel rail. And so those pumps are actually mounted underneath the trunk bottom. And for all of this, including the nitrous heater system, which is currently not installed, but the wiring harness is there, made a nice little panel. This is actually from Littell Fuse. They have a modular panel system for automotive relays and ATC fuses. So this went together really nicely. It's missing a fuse. That one's actually for the nitrous heater circuit, which currently isn't hooked up. But this actually takes care of all the accessory and fuel pump wiring in the back, and I'm going to be making up a nice label to go here. I found some really nice printable chemical resistant labels from Avery, so we'll see how those turn out and install. But this takes care of the back, and so there's, unlike a lot of race cars where you'll find massive amounts of relays kind of stuck everywhere, in this, with all the layout, actually all the wiring harnesses have been bound with gaffing tape. Not actually gaffing tape, friction tape. And basically full new harnesses built so that all of the wiring is cleanly and tucked in and safe. Everything's zip tied down where possible. So there's these zip ties mounted on studs that you can see one up here. So it's basically a screwed in plastic mount, and then the zip tie actually attaches to that. So this gets me a nice clean path through the front, keeps the back nice and tidy. While I was at it, instead of using the charging studs, which are normally mounted on the bumper, and we do have a set, but instead of that, I thought, hey, why not? I've got a fuel door and I'm not going to use it. So it's actually an Anderson power pole connector. It just happens to fit, or not a power pole, an SB series connector. It just happens to fit perfectly, so we put it in there. So moving up to the front of the car, through the passenger compartment, the wiring comes in through the back, and basically I couldn't find a good path down either side. The original wiring of the vehicle didn't actually run down the sides exactly. There's no, and with this whole piece of sheet metal replaced with where the back seat would have been, there just wasn't any good way. So running it straight down the center, this has a bunch of sheet metal panels that cover this up, so it's not quite so messy. But you actually start running into, I have not done much with the instrument panel, the dashboard area. This is just a mess. This is all the wiring for the gauges and the nitrous controls and everything. And if you take a look in here, it's a mess. I mean, it's actually even worse underneath the steering wheel. And so that's probably a project for next year. But this has gotten me to the point where I can actually cover things up and be confident that it will crank reliably, that I'm not going to have any wiring issues with the fuel pumps or any sort of issues there. I can track down and verify that the relays are kicking because I know where they are now. And the battery is actually properly mounted now, which is a big requirement in NHR racing, NHRA. So that's been a big project, but you know, a lot of attention to detail and taking some time, carefully think it out. Makes for a pretty clean setup. And yeah, now I just have some other last minute details to button up and then go through and actually retune the engine.